miles de historias. Una profunda mirada al panorama cinematográfico internacional. Festival Internacional de Cine Guanajuato. Homenaje internacional a Peter Weir. Como quien ahonda en la naturaleza humana, bajo necesidad de vivir, leer y pensar entre películas, Weir busca lo nunca antes visto para relatar una obra a mano. Un artesano siguiendo la senda de la mejor historia por contar, con un equilibrio que solo se alcanza por medio de la profundidad temática, dedicación y dote técnico. Peter Weir es artífice de un cine situado en la justa intersección entre industria y nervio creativo. Investido con el porte estético de Frank Capra, a quien consideraba una inspiración, Weir se define a sí mismo como un exigente artesano. Peter Weir es uno de los miembros reconocidos de la nueva ola australiana, un movimiento llamado así por la prensa, que incluía actores como Mel Gibson y Judy Davis, o directores como George Miller y Gillian Armstrong, artistas que salieron del país a principios de los 80, alcanzando éxitos que le valieron ingresar en el primer plano de la industria fílmica a nivel mundial. En su colección de premios y nominaciones destacan los Globos de Oro, premios Oscar, BAFTA, César, Berlinale, Cannes, Hamburgo o Varsovia. Su película Picnic in Hanging Rock, un elogio a la belleza que le supuso su primer éxito ante la crítica y el público, inspirada en la inquietante novela homónima.
I'm not really a particularly nostalgic person, but I think films remain outside of nostalgia. I think they're like little worlds that you lived in, like a period you lived in another country.
Yes, ladies, hanging rock.
With a film and that little world, when you recall it, you remember the good and the bad in equal measure. So it's a very pure kind of memory. When I sat down with Picnic at Hanging Rock, I was somewhere in my early 30s, Patricia Lovelow brought it round to me, and then I knew who she was. She was a television personality, but that was a very curious knock at my door. She'd seen an early film of mine, I think it was Homesdale. I can't say what connection she saw in it, but I'm delighted she did, to think that I could handle something like this. In that period in the Australian film industry, in the early 70s, the idea of making a film from a book was really very foreign. It sounded the big time, that's what they do overseas, whereas we wrote our own stuff. I read it from cover to cover, was gripped by it, and by the fact it was an unsolved mystery. And I was burning with it. I mean, it was just like electricity through my body. And I was very keen to make it. I said, how do you go about this? I mean, do you have to get rights? I mean, that's how early it was in the revived Australian industry. But the gatekeeper wasn't in this case a bank manager or a film distributor financier. It was Joan Lindsay herself. She had to approve the production team, and certainly had to approve the director. So I had to go and meet her. She was a woman of refinement, of elegance, a woman from a world as vanished as is the world of the characters in Hanging Rock.
Gallipoli, película sobre las ilusiones y sueños que dejan atrás algunos jóvenes de la Australia rural para luchar en la Primera Guerra Mundial, donde saben que encontrarán la muerte. Destacan también obras como The Truman Show, de manufactura original e impresionante. Aborda una crítica al poder de la televisión, la lucha por las audiencias y el voyeur que todos llevamos dentro. El mayor logro de Weir es convertir un guión que se pensaba como thriller de ciencia ficción en una divertida distopía. Transformar lo que se preveía como sombrío y depresivo en una comedia luminosa. Aunque se cuestionó bastante la elección de Jim Carrey como protagonista, el actor dio cátedra de actuación al llevar a su personaje de la hilarante comedia a la angustia dramática, lo que le valió un Globo de Oro.
I will really love this. I'll enjoy it so much, right down to the chewy chocolate center. Thank you.
The Year of Living Dangerous, por la que Linda Hunt ganaría el Oscar y que le valdría a Weir la nominación a la Palma de Oro. Le siguen Witness, sobre la mirada comprometida y la maldición que conlleva el ser testigo de la verdad, pero también una historia acerca del amor y la empatía. También la aclamada Dead Poets Society, un poema visual sobre la naturaleza inquieta de unos jóvenes hambrientos de libertad. No importa lo que les digan, las palabras y las ideas pueden cambiar el mundo. Fearless, uno de sus largometrajes más ambiciosos, con una fotografía del alma humana que contó con la actuación maravillosa de Jeff Bridges, sumado a los grandes papeles de Isabella Rossellini, Rosy Pérez y John Turturro. Su más reciente producción es The Way Back, obra épica que le tomó 7 años desarrollar, un ensayo sobre la esperanza, la supervivencia y la fe en la humanidad, que narra la fuga de un grupo de presos de un campo siberiano y el largo viaje que realizan para atravesar Asia por completo. El Festival Internacional de Cine Guanajuato, en su 20ª edición, se honra en homenajear a Peter Weir, un director que más que seguir un plan maestro, transita el camino de la intuición, dando libertad a los actores para que improvisen sin dejar de esforzarse por alcanzar la excelencia. Un realizador que, como los mejores poetas, prefiere aludir a la esencia que señalarla, aumentando la complejidad del misterio, en un acto de rebeldía contra las sencillas explicaciones comunes del cine contemporáneo. Artífice de un legado cinematográfico imposible de olvidar. Peter Weir, en Guanajuato.
Muy buenos días. El Festival Internacional de Cine Guanajuato le da la cordial bienvenida y se honra con la presencia del maestro Peter Weir, a quien le pedimos un aplauso, por favor. Para conducir la masterclass pedimos la presencia de David Candel, director de Relaciones Internacionales del Festival Internacional de Cine Guanajuato.
Good morning. Well, Mr. Weir, can you tell us a little bit about what your life was growing up in 1950s Australia? Can you paint a picture for us of the life in 1950s Australia?
Well, I guess any era is really more resembles an earlier era. Probably 1950s Australia was probably like 1930s Australia. It was quiet. It was very conservative in its kind of daily routines. I came to understand more about it, of course, as I got older. For me, I was always hungry to travel. But I lived by the sea and was always swimming, like my friends, spearfishing. The water was at the playground. I'm always going to the beach. Later, I was a little severe in thinking my family and friends were very conservative, and that was a wrong thing, until I realised they'd fought a war. And I realised then later that so many of my father's friends just wanted peace and quiet after having 5 years of war.
What is your earliest film memory? With a lot of cinemas where you grew up?
Yes, it was as a boy going Saturday afternoon to the flicks, as we called them. And it was probably similar to a lot of the American experience. I've noticed with that generation that I'm part of, the Spielberg, Lucas kind of generation, it was Saturday afternoon serials, where you could see later the genesis of Raiders of the Lost Ark type thing, even Star Wars. And so you love the serial, and then I particularly like westerns. So my first real love was westerns, Hopalong Cassidy. Horror films I loved, particularly from England, and the thrill of being frightened. But my first real movies, I think, first one was an Australian film, which was unusual. There weren't many. Charles Chevelle made a film, Jeddah, which you may have had here, I don't know, about a love story between a tribal Aboriginal and a detribalised Aboriginal woman who was adopted by a white family. And he kidnaps her, in a way, and it becomes a pursuit. Anyway, as a child, I was absolutely stunned to see, this was our country in full colour, beautiful film. So I remember that, and then slowly came landmark films as I got a bit older.
What was the most important part of your early filmmaking education?
Oh, I hate to think of it as an education. It was because of such pleasure. I never thought of being a director. There was no concept like that, in a way. As I got, to my teens, movies were just part of your life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I went, as you did, regularly to the movies. We had television. Television also was a very big influence, maybe bigger than movies, on my unconscious. Because it was a great era of television. It came in 1956 in Australia. And my father loved it, I loved it, and we watched again a lot of westerns and comedies, and very high standard. And the Twilight Zone, and I loved that. So what I didn't know is I was absorbing all of these things. But I didn't think about movies for some years. And when I came back to Australia, when I was made my first film at about, I was 22 or 23, I think. What I came to want to do was to get into what I thought of, show business. I wanted to entertain. I didn't know if a writer or actor. Again, didn't think about the camera. But I wanted and felt I was destined for an artistic life, in a way.
But you didn't study filmmaking, you studied law, correct?
Yeah, just for 2 years. I was a dropout. Don't forget, this is all the time the 60s is coming, so the storm clouds of change. We're in the war in Vietnam. There's a little undercurrents which will break out later in the 60s. All I wanted to do was to travel. And so I guess I wasn't a good student, I dropped out, then I sold real estate for a while. My father was a real estate agent. And I made enough money to buy a one-way ticket to England, to London. And those days it was cheapest by ship. So I went a 6-week journey from 5 weeks from Sydney to Piraeus in Greece on a Greek ship, passenger ship, 700 passengers. And that was my rite of passage. That journey changed my life. I was, as I think I said, 20. And on board, I got involved in entertainment for the passengers.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, it started with GIFF's Review, which is, you know, an obvious one. We're crossing the line, the equator, we put on a show. The Greek shipping people didn't have any entertainment plan, and we found a little studio on the top deck with a camera. And we said, "What's that for?" To the purser, and he said, "We'd never used it, but sometimes if the captain wanted to make an announcement, he could use it." And we said, "So go to all the bars and the lounges that we saw TV sets." And he said, "Yeah, sure." And you know, it's like Mickey Rooney. That, "Hey, can we do a show? Let's put on a show." And so we put on an interview type show in which there were 3 or 4 of us all interested in this. And so one of us played the Tonight Show host. So we had 5 or 6 editions of this show at 6 p.m. at night. This was the only entertainment in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean. And then we played the part of guests who were apparently passengers. Eventually the show was banned by the captain because I did a report on the state of the lifeboats as an expert, a lifeboat expert. And they were very angry. But when at its peak, when it was going really well, 700 captive audience, they had Greek content, they had the news read in Greek, they put that on first, then we did the show. So when I got off the boat, I was hooked. I mean, this was it. You know, there was no going back to real estate.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your experience working on the Channel 7 Staff Social Club Christmas Review, and later the Marcus Bramson Show?
When I got back to Australia, I wanted to find work in the entertainment business. I tried theatre, maybe I could work backstage, nothing. I had no qualifications, no degree, nothing. I was married. My wife a teacher.
Whom you met on the ship?
Met on the ship.
Another highlight.
We went together. We met in London. But she helped on the show, yeah. So I got a job as a stagehand in a Sydney television station, putting sets up like this. This would be a morning's work, putting the flats up here and getting the chairs ready, that kind of stuff. Hammer overalls, and I loved it. But I sort of said to them, "Do you have a Christmas party?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "What do you do?" And they said, "Oh, you know, we have drinks." And I said, "Well, why don't you have a show? I mean, why don't you put on a review? I mean, we're in the business of television. Why don't we, you know, make up a review?" So I wrote a review with others, worked all year on it, and then I said to them, "Will you loan me a camera and will you give me processing from the laboratory, 16mm, and I'll shoot a little film for the review?" And they said, "Sure." So they gave me the equipment and the processing, and so that first film was entirely, you know, funded by the station. The only problem was the night of the performance, there was only one performance, Christmas. A theatre a bit bigger than this. This would be, you out here would be all the staff. After interval, my film was to come on. The laboratory had failed to print the soundtrack, so the film was mute. And the film was made like a propaganda film from the government, and the story was that at 65, you had to be killed. You had to commit suicide. And all the money the government normally spent on old age and health would be devoted to when you were younger. This was the deal. The state would keep you healthy as long as you left at 65.
It's like the American healthcare system.
Okay, so here we are, the night of the show. No soundtrack. So I grabbed a mic like this and sat down in the front row and did the narration and the sound effects. Only the people beside me knew what I was doing.
Like a radio show.
Yes, but, you know, so I would say on the original soundtrack it was a cold morning that morning in Sydney when Count Vim prepared for his last walk. Something like that. And then I would have wind blowing, and so I had to do all the sound effects, you know, so I would say, it was a cold morning in Sydney when Count Vim began his last walk. His feet crunched on the gravel. Hello, good morning. Did it like that. And when I came back to the laboratory the next day, they said, oh, I'm sorry about that, we'll marry the soundtrack. And I said, no, I want to do it like that again. So we recorded it, and that's the soundtrack. And I went on to do another one the next year. It got more elaborate. Then they promoted me to do film clips for variety shows. So I was sort of launched really through that into film.
And you had to do the entire process, I imagine. You were your own editor as well?
Yes, I did kind of a little bit of editing. No, I had somebody, because being at a television station, you had access to editors. The funny thing was, in that first film, on the credits, I put producer Peter Weir. And somebody said to me, no, you were the director. And I said, who cares?
As a young man, how did you resist the temptation that so many other Australians had of immigrating to the UK and the USA early in their careers? And why did you decide to continue working in Australia?
Well, you know, I think my generation was the first generation in the arts come back to Australia. So we had our trips to Europe, to England essentially. In America, no one went to America in the 60s or 70s. Not even for holidays much. It just wasn't in your consciousness. Everything was Europe. Everything was England. So they came home and began making movies or opening restaurants or dress shops, and an injection of vitality came from this generation. Once before us, because there were so few interested in artistic things, went to England and painted their pictures and wrote their books. So this was a big change. It was very exciting. Sydney was a very exciting city in that period. I think it's another period now, but you know how the cycle goes. Cities and countries have their time, and then it goes and then it comes back. So it was very exciting. And there was protests. It was the anti-war movement was, for us young people, a very big thing, and marches and moratoriums, and just like the United States. And only later did the thought of going to America enter anybody's head, because the government was putting money into the film industry.
And do you feel that the fact that you weren't exposed to the UK system, do you consider that an advantage to yourself, that you cultivated this other system in your native Australia, and then when you went out into the world, you had a different background or perspective?
I haven't thought too much about it, but I think, you see, I was living in the world of film by now. I mean, what I haven't mentioned is the Sydney Film Festival, which was really taken over and really made a wonderful festival by David Stratton. He's still a very prominent critic and around the world. So he got a really good contacts in the 60s, mid to late 60s, 1960s, and we had the best of European cinema and world cinema and the best of American cinema. You know, you got John Cassavetes stuff came out. So I was living in a kind of extremely sort of creative atmosphere from that festival. We'd talk about the films and we'd, know of them. So already already I was in a sense not thinking about the social situation or anything else. It was just movies.
And did you find that coming from Australia, that whenever you traveled outside your country, you felt like you were a fish out of water? And do you feel like this feeling had a big impact upon the stories that you portray on the screen?
A fish out of water is a horrible thought, isn't it? Flapping on the floor. No, I was a fish in water, but I just had to have a travelling tank. I think this sort of artistic personality, if I can call it that, which is not necessarily a virtue, it's just a type of person. Doesn't mean you make good things, but if you have that kind of personality, and you do find a métier for your talent, if you have it, you have to have it, then I don't think you really entirely belong anywhere. You can move, you know, I'm always fond of thinking of, Van Gogh as a Dutchman, but he was a long way from Holland. He did his Dutch pictures, but the ones we know are painted in France. There are many instances of artists who've needed to travel after a period in working in their home country. I think I took a long time to become comfortable in Australia. I think I felt European from that first 20-year-old lad travelling in Europe, hitchhiking after the ship. I slept one night in a field in Spain, I remember, and I had in those days you could hitchhike without problems. Studenti? Yeah, si, studenti, And you'd have your bottle of wine and your loaf of bread and your sleeping bag, and you'd stop sometimes in the countryside. Stop. Here, thank you, gracias. Get up, look around, go and sleep up there under the tree, have your wine, eat your bread, look up like that. And one night it was like Eureka for me. I'm a European. My family had been Scottish, Irish, or Scottish mainly, 2 generations. But I thought, this is where I belong. And then went to see England, and I didn't get to Scotland that trip, but didn't feel I belonged there. So it wasn't like I was English. I was just European. So over the years in the background, this may have worked its way into some films, not feeling quite comfortable in a way, or not settled anywhere. I think some of that came out in living dangerously. Now it's gone. So I'm very comfortable in my country and love it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working on a set, on a Ken Russell set in London?
Yes, I got a grant and went back in 1971. So I'd been back in Australia, made those little films, worked at the television station, and I got a grant from the Experimental Film Fund to go to Europe and spend time on feature film sets. So there I was on Ken Russell's set, assigned to the special effects department, physical effects. Ollie was my boss, to spend a couple of weeks, and they were shooting, Ken Russell was shooting The Boyfriend, very lavish sets in the studio of the 1920s filmmaking. And Twiggy was in the cast. And Ken Russell, for fun, had dressed like those days with the breeches, and he had a riding crop that he would hit on his leg, I was giving directions. So Ollie and I arrived on, and here was I, wide-eyed from Australia, my God. And what fascinating thing, and then suddenly there was a shout, well, hey, special effects. What is it? We had to hurry over to the director. He hit his riding crop, which had a head of a dog on it. And it was in ivory, and the dog head broke off the whip. So he said, the AD said, you boys take this to the workshop, fix the governor's whip. So we left this beautiful set to go into the workshop, put the glue on the head. And Ollie said, we'll be here half a day, mate. We can go to the pub. And I said, but I want to go back to the set. He said, no, you don't. Anyway, weeks passed it elsewhere.
As a young filmmaker, who did you admire the most?
I think influence is creeping in. It began in the strips, and all sorts of people influenced me. Jacques Tati, for example, younger. I loved his Monsieur Hulot. Then I was terribly interested in Nick Rogue at one point, and then Roman Polanski, and then towering above them was the Colossus of Stanley Kubrick, I think. And so I just was fascinated with what he was doing, and it was like a, I don't know, unique kind of experience, because he seemed to destroy the wall between art and what we then called commerce. There was a very, even sometimes snobbish view of a commercial film, which unfortunately implied that the people who went to it were stupid, the public. And there was an elitism about art house films, some of them bad films, but they were spoken of with reverence. And you should not cross the line. That would be considered a betrayal, and you will be dismissed and shunned. Stanley Kubrick had no barriers, no wall. And he, I remember the phrase, I think it was Beethoven said, "Oh, I embrace you, ye thousands," or something. And so Stanley Kubrick, like Beethoven, seemed somehow to embrace the millions. And he did, and yet didn't cheapen his work. This was high art, I think. He always took subjects which were very simple in their core, but that was important. So he was carried a light into the darkness for me.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your first big break in Hollywood?
Big break. I was offered a film after Picnic at Hanging Rock, my second film. I was over in Los Angeles helping with the producer, raising money for my next film. And I got an offer from Warner Brothers to do a film called Salem's Lot. And this had come via Stanley Kubrick. Stanley had seen Picnic at Hanging Rock and the cast. He'd seen both films, he saw everything. And he passed on Salem's Lot, and because he moved to The Shining, as I later learned. But he said, "You should give this to Peter Weir." And so I was flattered, amazed, took the script away to read, and worked with a Romanian writer, Petru Popescu, at the Chateau Marmont, which is a spooky place anyway. And one night we were working on it, and Petru started to look a bit strange to me, and he's a vampire story, this Salem's Lot thing, and he sort of went like that, He said, "Haven't you noticed?" Anyway, I found I couldn't do it. I couldn't get into the story. I couldn't believe it. I would have to make a comedy of it, which would be awful. And I also found that, because I never liked vampires, I thought they're a metaphor. What for? Just pure evil, I think. So I found I had to immerse myself in a sort of vat of evil to make the film, to make it powerful, which I couldn't do. So I said, "No, thank you," to the amazement of Warner Brothers, and the man who wanted to be my agent. He said to me, this guy was going to be my agent, "You're going back to Australia?" "Yeah." He said, "Damn it, do you know there are people here who would give their right arm for what you've been offered?" And I said, "Oh, really?" And anytime I returned to Hollywood, I used to look to see how many one-armed people I could see. There's quite a few. So I went back and made several more films at home until I was ready for change, really, after the year of living dangerously. So I'd made, I think, whatever it was, 5 films, 1 for television, 6 films, something like that. And, I needed fresh landscapes, fresh stories, change, really.
It sounds like you had temptations, or you had opportunities to go to England, or you had opportunities to go to the USA.
No, not to England. Not offers or anything there. No. There was so much happening at home in Australia that it wasn't on my mind. Yet I think all filmmakers are drawn to Hollywood. That's the first thing I have to say. Drawn by the history alone. And drawn by the films they saw as children. I mean, you know when you see something young, when you're full of wonder, it has such a deep impression. And it's maybe less so today with so many screens in people's lives, but in those days to see a big film. So it was interesting to go there, but you had to go, in my view, on your terms. And you had to go, in my view, with deep experience. So that when I sat opposite them, I could talk the talk, but also I could sometimes know more than they did about this script, this subject. So that's how I was when I finally sat with them about doing Witness, my first film, 1984. And I was ready to do it. And I was not intimidated, despite having to meet with the big star and so forth.
What made you think that you could take the risk of casting non-professional actors or comedians or people who weren't known for serious acting or dramatic acting, such as Harrison Ford, Robin Williams, and Jim Carrey in serious dramatic roles? What was the precedence, or what made you think that this could be possible?
Well, I think it all began with that first film. As you start, so you finish. You have to start well. And it was a good start for me working with American studios. But I have to tell you this. They sent the story, Witness, the script, fiction, film. I went and met Harrison Ford. He was the gatekeeper. He kindly invited me up to his house. We spent a few days in his ranch up in the mountains. We got on very well together. I flew back to Los Angeles and they said in a meeting, all executives, Jeff Katzenberg and others, well, Harrison called and he liked, you got on well, you guys. And I said, yes. He said, okay, let's go do this. Now here's the critical moment. I said, well, before we do that, what I would like to do is to tell you the story of Witness. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'd like in my own words to stand up here, take 10 minutes or a little more, and I will tell you the story, how I am going to do it. And they laughed, and Jeff Katzenberg said, you're going to pitch a film to us that we're offering you. And I said, yeah, you could say, but you will know what I am going to do if you hear me. He said, okay, go ahead. Everyone chuckles, this was odd, but I planned it. And so I stood up and I said, it sounds like the Count Vim. I said, crunch. I said, we see a field of billowing wheat blowing in the early morning breeze. Then across through the wheat come strange shapes. What are they? Black hats. Up through the wheat come a crowd of people dressed what? For a fancy dress or what? Are they in Europe? And they cross down to a road and a carriage goes past. It must be a period. And on screen comes the sign that says 1984, Amish country or something like that. And then went on to do the whole film in 15 minutes. And they said, well, I can see the picture better, said Jeff, than the script. And I made some changes in it, which I then put into the script. But so successful was it that when I came to do Dead Poets Society with Jeff, he said, I want to invite you to dinner and for you to tell me the story. So that's how I began. It was my show, it was my film, and they were financing it, and so I launched off into that world wonderfully.
and then took the picture to cut in Australia. From then it was always get in, shoot it, go home. Keep America foreign, keep it strange. I didn't want to become too familiar with it, because if I did, I felt I'd lose something. So coming back to these actors, Harrison was taking a risk. He had not been successful as an actor outside of these enormous hits of Star Wars and Raiders. But when he tried a few drama roles, he was a little self-conscious, or he wasn't, the films hadn't worked. But he wanted to roll the dice again and try something else. So when you work with a movie star, I realized, who is going to take a risk rather than be conservative to protect their stardom, it's very exciting, because together you are going to take this risk. And he depends on you, and you depend on him. And then I had that happen with Robin Williams and with Jim Carrey. Similar situations with their differences, but it's exciting. The worst situation would be to be with a star who was deeply conservative and fearful of losing what they had.
What do you think these types of actors who are not trained as dramatic actors, or they're comedians, what do you think they can bring to these types of roles?
Well, it's the very quality that made them a star. The camera likes to look at them, in the case of Harrison. I think it's ideal if you have both, if you had, the star power and training. I always love that quote of Ingmar Bergman, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Bergman, you've discovered so many actors." And he said, "No, I haven't. I always chose highly professional theatre actors. It's the best way," which I think is true. But nonetheless, the camera loves certain faces, and I think this system, by the way, we must say, is gone. In my ear, it's gone. I don't think there's any, maybe one or two movie stars now, but not a bunch of them, as there was in the 70s, because of the changes that have occurred.
Do you feel like a comedian like Robin Williams can bring more humanity to a role than, say, a dramatic actor?
No, there's no generalising. Robin was a unique character. He was just not like anybody else. It's a terrible tragedy. He died in the way, the circumstances. He was a curious man. The only time we could do any work was just like the two of us. We could talk seriously about how much comedy we could squeeze in without making the teacher Robin Williams all the time, an entertainer. But if we were in a hotel or something, if the waiter came in with a coffee, he changed, Oh, hello, the waiter got his coffee. No. His grandfather was a waiter, but then no. Something, very, very, very fun.
Did you feel echoes of Peter Sellers in Strangelove and Lolita working with these?
Not really, no. I would love to have worked with Peter Sellers. I grew up listening to the Goon Show on the radio, and he was obviously part of the cast. And I thought Stanley Kubrick used him so well. In Dr. Strangelove. I enjoyed talking with Stanley about that later when I met him. It was a shame we lost him so young.
So this idea of pitching the studios the story that they're trying to hire you for, why did you come up with that idea? Had you already been warned about the studios?
It just occurred to me. But then I think I was probably, I did some acting, younger in the reviews and so on, so I had some lack of fear to act it out. But also I was always trying to get another angle on my own scripts. I don't know when I started, but I would record them at home, Australian films even, before the film was financed even. So I'd sometimes do sound effects, on the table, but I'd do all the voices. Not day interior, I'd just say, like a radio show. He came into the room, he sat down, he looked up, Billy Kwan came in carrying his camera. He says to him, "What is it, Billy? What do you want?" So do the whole thing. Put it on cassette.
and put it in the car. And because I live about an hour out of the city, so there's a lot of driving. So I would put the script I recorded on cassette. So I'm driving and listening to it like a radio show. And I thought, oh my God, that doesn't work, you know, or that's good, or what's wrong with that? Or because you've got just that distance from it. Sometimes I'd write them as short stories, take the script if it was original and put it into a short story form. Trying to get another way of looking at it, really.
That strategy for basically pitching it to the studio, is this to avoid any sort of problems down the line in terms of the script changes? And
probably to some extent, but I think mainly it's to excite them. I mean, when I went in to meet Sherry Lansing about the Truman Show, Jim Carrey was involved and was still working on the budget or whatever, but this was our first meeting with her. And I was very excited by a piece of music my son had given me. He said, I think this is your film. This Pink Floyd track, Wish You Were Here. And he was right, you know, this was the movie synopsized in a song. So I came in to meet Sherry with the music. And, you know, hello Peter, and nice to meet, and it's exciting, and thing. I said, I want to play you the movie. She said, what? You know, I said, hey, can we put this on your sound system? This is the film. You know, and so, ha 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 ha, and we put it on, and she listens to it. I don't know what she really thought, but I said, can't you hear it? That's how this movie will be. And I think she got excited, or maybe she was excited because I was. But it broke up the conversation out of all the channels that these things go in all the time, you know, about rewrites and budgets. And, you know, you have to have some enthusiasm about what you're going to, you know, spend the money on, I think.
Well, it's more about capturing the imagination.
I think so, yeah. Because if I'm there, I'm excited. That's why I only took films that I could do this with. I could never take a film just because it was a good script, but I didn't feel excited, because otherwise I can't communicate that to particularly executives.
Speaking of casting decisions, I understand that Sylvester Stallone at one point was considered for the role of John Book in Witness. Was this under your watch, or was this before he came on?
Before, I think, yeah. Dustin Hoffman was interested, I know that. It floated around a bit, so did the Truman Show. There was, they were both considered writing samples, and the agent representing the writers had circulated it, you know, to really get them hired to write other movies, not those. But they were good enough that the people got into them. It could be good. Who's the director? That's what they would ask.
Do you think of Witness as a Western?
My producer did, and I could see what he meant, you know, but not really. No, I'd been trying to set up Mosquito Coast before Witness, and I'd been down in Belize, which is where we did shoot it now. And one morning in Belize, this is, as I say, prior to Witness, we were standing waiting to cross in a vehicle across a flooded river, and coming the other way, the punt coming back across, had these strange black-clad figures standing there in their hats and bonnets. And at first I thought, you know, people coming home from a party, you know, and I said, what are they? And they said, oh, Amish. There's a lot of Amish in Belize. I was fascinated by it. So that stayed in my mind, and then Mosquito Coast fell apart, and suddenly there was Witness. So it seemed like an echo of that day I saw. It was like an omen, a portent, something was coming, I would thought. So that's probably how I thought of it more. Also, I thought it was fascinating. This was a living museum. These were people in the United States of America who had congressional approval to leave school in the sixth form, who had permission not to serve in the army, who lived and spoke in high Deutsch, German. I mean, this was extraordinary to me. I didn't know why it wasn't more people talked about it. So I was able to go also into America, into another world. It wasn't like doing Mean Streets. I couldn't do that. But I could do that. Amish.
Speaking of the Mosquito Coast, I know at one point you were pursuing Jack Nicholson for the lead. How do you feel that would have changed the tone of the film?
I think radically, but it just didn't happen. And Harrison was very keen to do it, and we'd worked so successfully on Witness. And Jack, we just couldn't make the deal. The producer could not make a financial deal that made sense with Jack's people. So.
When I was 10 years old, my parents took me to see Witness in the theater. And then within a year or so, I saw Mosquito Coast on cable or VHS. They both left a big impression on me. First, in Witness, I really felt like I was seeing the world through the eyes of this small Amish boy. And that train station scene before the murder is really magical. And Mosquito Coast, the image that I most vividly recall was the family on the raft, weathering the storm, which to me was a great parable for the family, and kind of fed into my deepest, darkest fears, of my little world. Did you, at any point, think about an audience? Did you think that these films could be viewed by an entire family?
Yeah, well, and then about children, sometimes you think, because I had children growing up, one of them here fully grown with me, my daughter Ingrid. But so I was aware of children and what they like and don't like, and these were adult films, they weren't for children, I didn't think. But the audience I thought of all the time. Always I'm thinking, what will they think? What will they feel at this point? What do I want them to feel? And the other director talks like that a lot, but I mean, I'm sure a lot of directors think like that. But Hitchcock always talks about that, doesn't he? The audience. So that's the way I wouldn't change something in order to please them. It was just simply, they were part of what I was doing. They were going to make the film whole by watching it. The last making of the film is the person watching, because they bring their sensibilities, their emotions to join you. So you have to reach them, you have to get past logic into the unconscious. And then when the apparatus shuts down here, of logic and reason, and you're just gliding on emotion, you're back to the child, you're open to wonder. Not easy to get to that, it doesn't happen all the time, but so therefore I'm talking about them because they will help me complete the film.
Do you think what's your opinion of what's become today of film, with the lack of mature themes and subject matter, things that you echo in your films?
Well, I know more than you do. It's a confusing period. But I tend to think we've weathered a tsunami before in the film industry, which was sound. If we were talking, and it was, 1929, 28, 29, 30, saying what's going to happen. Because we have to realize they lost an art form. They didn't just get sound, they lost an art form. If you read particularly Jean Renoir, his talks about it, that the silent film was a different experience entirely to what we see. The nitrate had a quality, a glow. Yes, we know there may be music, but the experience of these big close-ups and the way they shot them because they didn't have dialogue, he said created what he can only call a kind of hypnotism or mesmerism in the cinema between the viewer and the screen, the result of the screen. And so it's gone, it's swept aside. Now we know a lot of times because people couldn't speak, they had foreign voices, whatever. But we then know this terrible sound period came in with a boxy camera, huge camera, microphones where the actors had to lean over and stand under the same point. So I would think a lot of people at the time thought, well, that's gone, that art form is gone. Now we're going to get plays, we're going to get dialogue, and chat, yak. And for a period, that did happen. And there was within that still some gems. And slowly, life came back and a new form of cinema emerged. Then it took the hit from television, which we're still taking, really, I think the internet, small screens, all screens, are really television, that's gone viral. But I think we'll get through it. You know what I'm interested in? It is meeting filmmakers, young filmmakers here and elsewhere in Australia, Garth Davis, who did Lion. So there's a sort of interesting phalanx of filmmakers who love it and love the tradition that I was part of, who I didn't know were out there till I travelled a little. And it's up to them, I think. The men and women who want to make these films will have to find a way to shape it. Because I don't think television's the same. The mini-series, maybe 6 episodes. But otherwise, television, I think, is a writer's medium. I think the screen is a director's medium.
Why do you think the studios have gone backwards in terms of attempting to challenge the audience intellectually?
Why have they gone backwards?
Yeah.
World market. Children, mainly, watch more than once. So although their ticket price is lower, they'll go a lot to the same film. And probably in the old days buy it on DVD. But so they began to study children, and horribly, and the certain stories children like. And then they were going into countries with little education in the third world, and they could tailor it for them. So I think these are marketing decisions that these companies have made, because that's what they're basically doing, is a business, making money. Yes, they like to go to the Academy Awards and they like the parties and they like Cannes, but fundamentally they've got to turn a profit, and they'll do it any which way. They'll go to China, as we see. So an era has passed. It's now out in the independent world that things happen.
One of the things I admire about your films is the very handcrafted look of all the films. And I imagine that it was a lot easier to do this when you're working on smaller budget films such as Hanging Rock and The Last Wave. But you seem to be an expert at doing it on a much larger scale with big budget films such as The Truman Show and Master and Commander. How do you manage to maintain this handcrafted look on films of such great scale?
Well, it just has to be that way. I mean, I know small detail, but I seem to buy props for most of the films, and
you personally
buy them and have them in my own house, for a while. A little suitcase Jim Carrey had in The Truman Show I found and bought. I thought that was a lovely little case. I bought the main swords for Russell Crowe. They were on the back of his ship. I bought them from a swordsmith in London, and one of them had been a real naval officer's sword from that era. And these don't mean much in themselves, but it's like a little amusing. But everybody gets to hear about all the departments, that he likes authenticity, he likes it to be real. And when there's a million details, it can move a mountain. Each detail is like a little ant building a nest. And you can go crazy with it, but you have to be careful. But I think it's, whether a big picture or a little picture, they're all big, by the way. All the your film you're making is so big. Count Vim was as big as Master and Commander, my first short film. They're both huge for different reasons. And huge in the sense that you have a huge challenge to make it work.
Do you work with the same team in terms of your art department, set designers?
Mostly, not always. My wife has worked in both costume, wardrobe and production design. My daughter did work for me with graphics in Master and Commander, simply because I knew she worked in another field. She's a designer anyway, but I said I need someone to really get the maps right, because they weren't right. So she flew out to Mexico to do that. Camera, yes, I've used, not always the same team, but there are certain people I'd like to use again.
Can you describe your working relationship with cinematographer Russell Boyd, and why did you two decide to work together again towards the end of your career?
Yes, we've done several films in Australia, and And then when I took Johnny Seal, the camera operator that we've been part of our team, to America. So I had dinner with Russell, and before I made this decision, I said, would you mind, Russell, if I use Johnny? Would it...
What time, around what time are you talking?
Just before Witness. So I think it was 83 or something like that. And he said, no, not at all, very generous man. No, I'd love Johnny to have a break. So Johnny and I worked for 3 films, then I had other cameramen, and I lost touch with Russell. He was always shooting. And one day I was flying to LA for meetings on, my early meetings on Master and Commander, before the script. And there was Russell flying to Los Angeles. And so we sat together.
On the plane?
Yeah, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, it's this ship. He's a great sailor, as is many Australians love to sail, go on little sailboats. And so by the end of the flight, I thought, wow, what an interesting meeting. I liked the way he talked, and we could do it again. So let's have dinner, and 2 nights later I said, do you want to do this thing, this, Master and Commander? Yeah, why not?
That's terrific. It was just a chance meeting on an airplane. Oh. Roger Corman was our guest here a few years back. What does Death Race 2000 owe to the cars that ate Paris?
Everything. He bought, apparently supposedly bought his agent, his man in Cannes, bought the cars that ate Paris to distribute. And he held it for a year. We kept saying, what's happening when you're releasing it? And he'd, oh, soon. Then finally he said, no, I'm backing out of the deal. And it went to New Line Cinema. He said, at least arrange someone else for it. But I was shocked then to see him bring out this film. I mean, if it had just been in the marketplace that he saw my film, you would say it was, okay, homage. But the fact he kept it, anyway, not a happy story.
Sorry to hear that. There seems to be a consistent use of water in many of your early films. Is this a coincidence or just a convenient plot device, or does water have a deeper meaning in your films?
Well, as I said, grew up by the sea, but there was a point early on where some interviewer said, in the 70s, you're onto water, aren't you? Water's your thing. And I said, well, what do you mean? You described several scenes with water in different films. I said, yes, it is fascinating. It is fascinating. But after the interview, I thought, I mustn't use it anymore. Because I don't want any tricks, like that. So I'm not aware of, only when it's part of the story.
Can you still do the types of projects that you would like to do in the current system?
Difficult, very difficult. I'm an odd case because I am, worked in 20 years in the American studio system that we've been talking about, which has been, sort of transmuted into another kind of business. And they don't make those films. It's not worth their effort. They do bigger budgets and sequel possibilities, important. So I'm back to the independent world, where I began. And my last film, The Way Back, was independent. And so I'm there I've got a script, and we talk about things, and maybe we do it here. But it's, a different thing. It's tough. It's hard.
That's kind of an interesting arc, going from the independent to
back to my roots,
and back to roots. And when you look back on your career, do you wish you had more opportunities to direct feature films in the 1970s?
Well, opportunities I created, so I didn't create them because I didn't find an idea I wanted to do. I don't think it's worth doing, really. I mean, it's not that hard to make a film. If you've got, love movies and a reasonable understanding, you get a good writer, you get a good camera, you get good actors, and you say, action. Then you say, cut. Unless you're like Alfred Hitchcock, watching him shooting Frenzy in London, he only said one word, the most important word, cut. So it's not that hard, but to make a good film, to make the sort of film you love,
when you are enclosed in the film. Takes time to find the right material, right story. Really.
Are the projects that you're currently looking at now, are they kind of in the vein or relative budget size of, say, like Most Dangerous Year? Would that be like the type of...
Year Living Dangerously?
Year Living Dangerously.
Yes. I don't know, you'd have to compare the finances here, probably. But, you know, some of the budgets are too, I mean, for my project I might want to do it too small, I can't get too big with the budget. It's just a little tricky. But as far as projects go, what I'm offered through my agents and so on are all true stories. And it's always said to me as if it's a badge of honor. It's a true story, you know, as if, thank God, it's not fiction. I don't understand that, you know, it's... and so a lot of them I'm often tend to be biographies and sort of historical incidents which don't interest me. My wife has a theory that 9/11 killed the fiction film for some time. It was so horrifyingly real that since then, real things, it's true, has the weight that fiction once had. Fiction's almost, unless it's fantasy, but an adult story that is made up. So what's your movie? It's called Rubber Eye or something. Yeah? What's it about? Who's in it? And then you start to say it's a sort of story of a man or something. If it doesn't have a hook of sort of the true story or something really startling, it's hard to get people interested to finance it. And many of the movies that we love would never have been financed because they don't have that kind of hook. So I think it's an interesting thing, this true story side of filmmaking now.
Do you currently have projects in development, and can you share anything about it at this point?
Yeah, no, I never would. You know, I mean, it's bad luck. But yes, I have something that's that I've been working on for some time.
And are you working on it with the intention of it being released theatrically? And will you only work on films that are released theatrically?
It's hard to say that. I would say yes, it is. It's a theatrical. We'll aim it for cinema. Mm-hmm. But you know, there is now Amazon, Netflix, as we know, who may finance it, but maybe a week screening, and then it goes on to their subscribers. But you know, yeah, if you have to survive, you know, that's if the rules have changed.